Welcome to Overanalyzing Longsword. So today I'm going to talk about the second Super Major tournament of 2025, which happened this past weekend, Fechtberg in Poland. So first I'm going to talk a little bit about the tournament, and then I will do some analysis, some longsword analysis later. So if you want to skip to the analysis, I'll put a timestamp in the description. First, I'm going to talk about this tournament. So, Fechtberg was special for several reasons, in addition to being a generally very high level tournament. It had two specific fencers, Miro Latela and Antek Olbrycki, ranked 1 and 3 respectively in HEMA ratings. Um, and the last time they fenced each other was the finals of Helsinki Longsword Open 2024, where Antony beat Miro in the finals for the first and second spot. So since then, Miro kind of went crazy in 2024 and won an insane amount of tournaments. He ended up with 4 gold medals, um, a silver, and a bronze in 2024, all in major tournaments. So he's kind of the it's by pretty much any metric, he is the most dominant fencer of 2024. Meanwhile, Antec won Helsinki Longsword Open, probably definitely the largest tournament of the year, probably one of the largest tournaments of all time, and then just didn't compete again. So now we finally get to see them together once again in the same tournament. So let's see what actually happened in this tournament. So first, let's see how Miro and Entic did. So Miro, you can see, lost his second match to Mikołaj Kładzia. So if you remember my video on Tierenhau, or if you followed Tierenhau at all, he was the runner-up there, rated 1840 going into this tournament. So definitely a very highly rated fencer. No disrespect losing to him. It's a lot of people lose to Mikołaj. Anthony lost to Mark Wilkie in his second round. So Mark Wilkie rated 1752 going into this tournament. Definitely a very skilled fencer, and we'll talk more about him later in this video. So who did go on to win this tournament? The finals were Karol Zakshevsky and Bohdan Danchenko. So Bohdan, once again, if you remember my Tierenhau video, or if you simply followed Tierenhau, you know that he won the entire tournament. So very good fencer, um, rated in the 1800s. Carroll, on the other hand, was a little bit of a dark horse in this tournament, rated 1577 going into this tournament, which is definitely a respectable rating, but not a rating that you expect to see in the finals of a tournament of this caliber. So I want to emphasize this because not only did he make the finals, so sometimes you can say like, oh, well, this person made the finals, but in the bracket they didn't, necessarily meet the hardest people. That is not the case for Carroll. So starting with his third round, he fenced Federico Daolio, who is rated 1802 going into this tournament, and then Mikołaj, who I mentioned earlier, rated 1840 going into this tournament, and then Pavel Dostal, rated 1776, who I'm also going to talk about more in later in this video. So definitely 3 huge wins. This is a huge. It's hard to overstate how difficult of a run this is. Um, and especially for someone rated 1577. So for some perspective, if you're rated 1577, it means you probably win most of your pool matches, but maybe you don't make it past the first few rounds of bracket. Maybe you have, a couple medals, but it's definitely not usually considered medal contention for a tournament of this size. So once again, and we saw that in Helsinki a couple weeks ago too. lower rated people making it into onto the podium of these kinds of tournaments. So 2025 is shaping up to be an interesting year for Longsword. So I'm going to be analyzing Mark Wilkie versus Pavel Dostal. So I have a couple reasons for this. First is because I have video of it, thanks to Duncan McLaren. Secondly, I think it's interesting. Mark, as I mentioned before, beat Anthony Obritsky, the world number one, to make it to this third place match, which is very impressive. So he had a good run. He also beat Martin Vrabo, highly rated fencer. Um, Lost to Bogdan Donchenko, as we mentioned earlier, to make into the match with Pavel Dostal. Okay, so for my analysis, I'm going to focus on two exchanges, and I'm going to call it the Tale of Two Squinters. So I think that these two exchanges that I'm going to show represent kind of a microcosm of the match as a whole. So there are seven exchanges total in the match. Out of six of those exchanges, Pavel starts in a left foot forward shoulder guard and engages with a cut either from the short edge or with the short edge, or with the long edge, or with the flat. So it's there's pretty common patterns in this match. I also think this is interesting because Squinter against a point forward guard is something that some people struggle with. So maybe this will help, um, show how to more successfully do it. So let's take a look. So those are the two. They're both right in a row, and you can see both of them are the same setup: a thrust versus a cut. The first one, the thrust wins. The second one, the cut wins. So what makes the difference here? What's the reason for one winning over the other? So in the first exchange, yeah, you can see he gets that cut or that thrust right in. So let's kind of slow it down a little bit. So here we have the situation just before the thrust happens. So you can see the setup here. Mark has kind of pushed Pavel to the end of the court. So Pavel doesn't have much room to step back, so he doesn't have much other option other than to step forward. So I think here we see Pavel take a small prep step forward with his left foot before launching his cut. And I think this kind of breaks down the distance a little bit more than he needs, and that allows Mark to get his point in. All right. So here is another key point. So we see the contact of Mark's point on Pavel's mask. Okay. So I'm sure your coach has taught you about strength and weakness of the sword, right? You have the strength of the sword, you have the weakness of the sword. You want to get the strength of your sword on the weakness of your opponent's sword, and that way you can move them around and do whatever you want. So, as the person doing the squinter or whatever kind of counter cut against the thrust that you're trying to do, um, they're not always with the short edge. So like the next one, it's not going to be with the short edge, but I feel like it does the same thing that a squinter is supposed to do. So I'm just going to call it a squinter. Get mad in the comments if you want. Um, so here you can see Pavel is correctly putting the strength of his sword on the weakness of his opponent's blade. But why does it fail to push the blade out of the way? It's because the point is already caught on his mask. Okay, so why is the strength so strong? It's because it's closer to the fulcrum. It's a lever and it's closer to the fulcrum of the lever. So what happens is when you plant the point into onto your opponent's body, into their mask or whatever, you create another fulcrum. So the weak of your sword basically becomes another strength. So that's why we see now, even though Pavel correctly, under normal circumstances, his leverage would have been correct, but in this case, his sword just slides safely to the side for Mark, and Mark is able to finish the clean thrust, and the judges see it and award it. So for this next one, the cut wins. So we can see a different setup, okay? So this time, Pavel's not going to allow himself to get pushed into the corner. He's gonna attack and break the distance before he gets pushed back. And we can see here, he when he gets the point in, he brings his strong to the weakness of his opponent's blade. So here you can see that strength on weakness bind, okay, or that contact. Look where his foot is, okay? So his back foot is just leaving the floor now, just as he's making contact with Mark's blade. So a couple more frames. His foot has basically just left the ground, and now his point is planting on Mark's chest. So this is the timing that you want. You want to get that strength onto your opponent's blade, bring the sword forward, because remember if their point's in front of you, you need to engage it. Okay, otherwise you're just going to get stabbed. If it's low and you're tall, maybe sometimes you can get away with going above. I do sometimes, but if you really want that, that shield how action, even though it's with the long edge, whatever, still calling it a shield how. If you really want that shield how sliding the sword out of the way action, you bring the strength forward as you're cutting into their blade, okay? And then it kind of slides down. It's very satisfying. And it plants into his opponent, and he gets awarded for it. Very nice, very nice actions. So what makes the difference? Mostly the distance, but there's a little bit more to it than that. Um, because distance doesn't just happen. It happens for a reason. It happens because of how it's set up and what both fencers are doing in the match. So I hope that was interesting, and I hope that maybe helps you with some splinter ideas in the future. So to wrap it up, Fechtberg, very interesting tournament. Unfortunately, we didn't get our Clash of the Titans between Miro and Antec, but there are still a few more tournaments this year, at least two that I know of, that they will both be at. So look out for SoCal Swordfight and Edge Bonham. I will be at SoCal this year, so I will definitely do some kind of analysis after that tournament. Um, and yeah, so look forward to that. So thanks again. Thanks for watching, and do Longsword.